Teachers of Reddit, do you have a former student that you thought was doomed but ended up making it big? What's their story? Not a teacher, but I had this classmate in high school who was the biggest D*ck I saw in my entire life. Would beat people up if he didn't like the way they walked or whatever, would made teachers so angry in class one of our teachers was rushed into the hospital due to hypertension. One day in our senior year, his mom and dad were tragically killed in a car crash, leaving him responsible for his 3 younger siblings. Didn't see him for a few weeks, then one day came back and the principal was kind enough to accept him again back to school, but was informed that he may not graduate due to his very low grades. I have never seen such a sudden change of personality in my life. The dude became so focused, determined on graduating high school, it was scary. Fast forward 20 years, in the year 2022, I had some legal issues to deal with, and one of my friends recommended me to a lawyer and was surprised when I saw him. All changed, turned his life around, saw the graduation pictures of his siblings displayed in his office wall, and has a beautiful wife and a daughter. Son of 2 teachers, not a teacher. Our class criminal was acting out in grade school. He was a bully. He'd push kids downstairs. He grabbed the boobs of the first girl in our class to have them. When he'd get in trouble, he'd run away from school, and the principal would get in his VW bug and chase the kid down. In JR High, he was suspended as often as he was in class, it seemed. The same was true in high school. He didn't so much as graduate, as was passed on a plea bargain. Many years later, I saw him on Facebook. He's an oil man in TX. His house is bigger than my yard, by a lot. He has a beautiful wife and daughter. On the surface, he made it, and is living the dream. Now, he may still be a criminal. Financial success doesn't make one a good person. I don't know who he is these days. All I can say is, growing up, I pictured him in jail or maybe in a trailer park as an adult. I never pictured him in a mansion living the high life. I started with a student whom was 4 years old and he was bright and enthusiastic. He really loved dinosaurs, so I provided him with materials. However, he did suffer from some jealousy problems and occasional temper tantrums, and after a 2-month period where he went to a public school, he came back looking shell-shocked. He was destructive, vindictive, and a constant headache in the class. He was difficult, couldn't stand losing, and his focus was terrible. He was easily provoked by other students, so at the slightest altercation he'd sit and stew and plot to get revenge, from physical attacks to sneaking off and tearing up their projects. Eventually the parents took him to a psychologist who diagnosed him with low intelligence, bad temperament, and ADHD. That's what you get for being in Vietnam. Still, I went from teaching him in my school, to privately, and once COVID started and I left the country, I taught him online. Once the online lessons became one-on-one, I'd let him choose what he wants to learn about, with the only requirement of it being educational. He developed a fascination with history, and we've managed to cover from the Peloponnesian Wars, to the founding and mistakes and successions throughout the Roman Empire, to understanding the Byzantines, and even being able to weigh an opinion in on the partitions of Poland, and why certain events. He questions everything and is really quite brilliant, so much that I look forward to teaching him every week. He is 10 now, and fluent in English, as that's the subject I'm teaching him. Another not a teacher post, but I did some volunteer work in mental health services for teens, specifically with music. Probably obviously, teens with mental health problems can be incredibly self-conscious and reserved. This one girl in particular was quite timid most of the time when there was anyone with her who wasn't a close friend. Over the course of a few years, I managed to coax her into singing in front of me, then to the group, then at a fundraising event for the group. The last thing I heard about her was a post on Facebook that a friend showed me. She was complaining about there only being about 50 people at a gig that she was playing. I still remember having to talk her into that first performance with just 1 or 2 people there. There was a kid at my school, he was part of the roadman group. There were some more inner city kids at my secondary school. This guy came into school high, disobeyed the uniform rules, he used to shoplift after school, always went after girls in younger years, and was just generally not someone who seemed to be heading in a good direction. Today he's an activist with his own business dedicated to helping kids in unfortunate situations, and it seems to be doing very well. Not a teacher, but I was the special ed kid who was regular all along. I was semi-nonverbal as a kid, and wouldn't really do school work in kindergarten, 3rd grade. I didn't really have a support system at home, and had no interest in learning to read or do schoolwork, really. I just wanted to go home and play Nintendo. Towards the end of 2nd grade, they started actively monitoring me and another young child. They would sit in on my school day, take notes about my behavior, and leave. They wouldn't talk to me at all, and I didn't realize their presence had anything to do with me until much later. Based on those reports, they moved me to special ed. I'm not sure if they thought I was just slow, or on the spectrum, but every day I would leave class for half the day and go to direct one-on-one class with an aide. She taught me all kinds of fundamentals I should have had before then. I was in the 3rd grade before I learned how to tie my shoes, for example. She taught me how to read. She taught me how to communicate. By the 4th grade, I didn't have to go to special ed anymore. I was vaguely normal. It would take until the 8th grade before I finally made friends, but it would have never happened with her. Unfortunately, much of my childhood is kind of a vague blur. I can't even remember which of the elementary schools I went to where she was. I wish I knew how to unlock this memory and find her, if just to write a heartfelt letter of appreciation. Wherever you are, whoever you are, thank you for saving me. Define making it big. If you mean was famous for eating his wife, then yes, he made it big. Obligatory. Not a teacher, but I was a guest speaker at a university. This is also somewhat the opposite of the question, but I wanted to share the story. I was speaking about data science and had built an interactive toy model to teach the kids about sentiment analysis that we played with at the end. For those unfamiliar, sentiment analysis is analyzing text to determine whether the feeling is positive or negative towards a topic. So the kids would put in keywords into positive and negative lists, and it would automatically tell them how accurate their keyword lists were. So after the talk, the professor brought one student up to me to talk. He showed me something I still can't believe. He had built his own sentiment analysis tool in Excel. These kids maybe didn't have much access to technology, even laptops seemed quite dated there. My guess is this was the only tool he had access to, and he built a custom sentiment analysis tool in Excel. My mind was a bit blown away by that. It was really impressive what this kid had managed to do given the limitations he was working within. I don't know what happened to that student, but I think about him sometimes and wonder where he ended up. I hope someone recognized that talent, and he's been given some amazing opportunities to create and code. Had a few students who turned out to be murderers and one became a rapist. Can't think of anyone who ended up big. I wonder if Kevin's teacher is gonna post here. Not a teacher, but I knew a kid who was your stereotypical couldn't give a fuck student. He never did his work, pissed off teachers, cut class, did all kinds of drugs, and always had detention. I remember the highlight of his work was writing an essay on why he was black, despite being white. About mid-senior year, he dropped out, and he kinda just disappeared. I honestly thought he'd end up in jail at some point. In 2019 my job sent me over to a site to do a survey for a company installing our AV equipment. Lo and behold, the guy leading the project was the same wild and crazy kid from high school. We chatted and caught up on things, but the guy really turned his life around. He got his GED, quit drugs, took up trade jobs, and worked his way up to a senior position in that AV installation company. It's interesting to see how people change like that when they enter the real world. Not a teacher, I worked administration in an elementary school. But I did take kids with low reading scores to the side to give them tutoring whenever I could. One kid stuck out. 15 words read per minute despite being 8 years old. She had no confidence in herself, was too terrified to talk to anyone, burst into tears at any mistake she made. Let's just say her family was unsupportive and difficult. I did not see progress for months. I was worried about her future in school if she continued to lag behind and be too anxious to make it in the world. But eventually, she started talking to me. She stopped crying at mistakes, repeating my mantra, "It's okay to make mistakes, mistakes mean you're learning." The words per minute score went up little by little as she began to show interest in different reading materials. By the end of the school year, she was looking forward to seeing me, and her teacher said she was excited when the class took library trips. That teacher and I convinced the school to let me continue monitoring the student into the next school year. They agreed. One more year of tutoring passed. That shy, terrified girl became confident and happy. She talked to everyone, helped out in class, and demonstrated fascination with learning new things. The new teacher told me how this kid was always trying to sneak books in between classwork. In second grade, when we began, this student was one of the lowest scored readers in her grade, but by mid-year of third grade, she was highest score. She was even helping out other kids. I worked for a couple years after she graduated from my tutoring, so I got to see her in the hallways. She always liked to tell me what she read in class, what she read in her personal time, and see what I'd recommend for her to read next. By the time I left my job, she was going to middle school and I knew she'd be just fine. I've had a few kids stand out. One of my first ones was a kid who was in my GR10 drama class. Nice kid to me, no major issues. Funny, not super academically inclined, but started to really like drama and we got along. He missed class somewhat frequently for excused absences that were noted as court. I assume mostly weed related, just because of reasons. But I never asked. Anyway, halfway through the semester he came in and announced it was his last day because he was being sent to juvie and he was upset he wouldn't be able to co-tung in drama, his other courses they could manage through distance ed type things. Was subbing back at the school the following year and ran into him. He'd caught up on all his missing credits while in juvie because he had nothing better to do, so why not get some shit done? He was going to now graduate on time and was super proud of himself. Not sure where he's ended up now 10 years later, but weed is legal now, so as long as he's not dealing, hopefully he's doing okay. Different school and where I ended up getting a permanent position, so I stayed in the same place for a while, had this girl show up in GR9 and had her for arts and English. She was, a lot. She would full shut down and just not do anything. Or talk. Or she'd have a full-blown tantrum. She was exhausting. I drug her along through the arts class and got her participating some days, which was apparently huge because in elementary she was just left to do nothing all day because she wasn't disruptive. I jokingly suggested she take drama with me the following year, but she hated speaking in public, so figured that was a no-go. Did get her to do the lighting for the school show though. She took drama every year. By the end of GR12 she engaged with people, she could speak in front of the class, she was completing credits, slowly and with a lot of support, but you could get work out of her. Apparently I became her favorite teacher and I was one of the only ones she would do work for initially. But my God, was she a lot of work some days. Glad I stuck it out because we got there eventually. I hope Kevin's teacher turns up with an update. Stoner kid who did nothing but doodle on everything. Ended up a big shot at Lucasfilms and then Disney. For my primary school teachers, I was probably that kid. Never spoke, could never finish a worksheet to save my life. Had all the tutoring in the world and I just couldn't understand numbers. Didn't understand punctuation for a while either. Luckily, English just clicked for me one day and I went from F to A in a week. Turns out I had undiagnosed autism and the way they were teaching these fundamentals didn't slot into my head right. God bless my extra help teachers because they sat me down and gave everything the most arbitrary rules so that it would make sense. I can't remember them properly now, but I just remember explaining my young self's logic of the world to her, and she made all the punctuation and math symbols slot into those rules so I could use full stops and multiply things without going crazy. Now I'm in university studying STEM, probably still applying a lot of Mrs. Brown's logic without realizing it. Bless that woman's patience, because I wouldn't have been able to get into top classes in secondary school without her. I taught a first-year university course. It was the fall semester, so for many students it was their first semester at university ever, and I had one student who struggled. She was young, it was her first time living away from home, and she seemed perpetually overwhelmed. I think she was just naive and inexperienced. About a month into the semester and her grandmother passed, and they were very close. She came to my office to tell me she had to go home for the funeral and would miss a couple of classes. She was sobbing, and I comforted her and told her not to worry about class. When she left my office, I honestly thought that I would never see her again and that she was going home permanently. I was wrong. She came back a week later and she was laser focused. She started speaking out in class and asking questions. She came to all of my office hours and study groups, and she began to make connections with other students in the class. She absolutely blew it out of the water, aced the final exam, and finished the course with the highest grade. We stayed in contact, and I was actually her reference for an intensive internship that she was very excited about. She got it. I will never forget her, and she truly humbled me. Was really a lesson for me not to underestimate people. I never thought a student would go bad but had them go good. I did have a student who was supposed to be a high school dropout but ended up graduating law school with honors. Taught geography to a very talented, and now famous, footballer. He wasn't particularly academic, but is now a multi-millionaire. The tabloids loved his scandals, but I dare say he's loving his retirement now. Had a teacher tell me I'd probably end up managing a Borders, but they went under in 2011, so the joke's on her.